So he used to really say this kind of thing with all of his students. He told us that as a scientist, you're an adventurer, a detective, and I think you all know the rest. Detective and storyteller, but I kind of wanted to break that down into little moments that I saw from where that came from. So first off was adventurer. The biggest smile that you would ever see on his face was when he was on the back of an alligator or taking an amazing photograph or looking at wildlife, hiking. He loved nature. His home was in the natural environment, and he just had the most amazing time out there. This picture was taken in, I believe, 2011, we believe? 13, thank you. And so looking through some of those photographs, you can really see just this big grin on his face from every time. And it's so lovely to like go back to that and realize that he had such a passion for his work. And he really didn't think it was work because of that passion.
So he, like I said, he recruited me to UF. He was not assigned to me as my faculty mentor, but he was my de facto unofficial faculty mentor. Introduced me to thinking about systemically circulating hormones and exogenous factors that could mimic hormones. And, you know, it changed my way of thinking from locally acting gene networks that might signal over a couple of cell diameters to how all of these patterning events are playing out in the context of different hormonal contexts. My first NIH grant was an R21 with Lou. We were comparing genital development between mice and alligators. I think during the time that he was here, and I was here, I think we served on the PhD committees of all of each other's students. When he became an HHMI professor, I was so proud of him and so pleased, and he encouraged me to apply for an HHMI Early Career Scientist Award, and which I got, and he could not have been more thrilled for me. He always treated me like his colleague and his peer. I never really saw it that way. So Lou was about 15 years older than me, and so accomplished that I just didn't feel that I felt like he was my advisor, frankly. And we were very close, and we collaborated, and I think it was a give and take relationship, but I just had such respect and admiration for him, and I modeled my mentoring style after his. And you've already heard, this is really, I think what will come out over the course of the meeting is the same themes over and over again about his style. And the first one that I noticed with him was that people come first. And it was all about the people. And I thought that was a very important mindset to have in advising students and postdocs. Also, that credit is earned and is infinitely divisible. That was that's a Louism. Credit's infinitely divisible. And the other thing I learned from Lou that he never articulated, but this is something I just got by sort of osmosis, and that was just be yourself. Right? There's no need to, I think especially when you're junior, you feel like you need to kind of rein in some of your wackiness and be a little bit more straight. Lou didn't do that. He kind of gave me permission to just be me and share your enthusiasm. He was about lifting up others, taking risks, putting the students' interests ahead of his own interests, and cut people slack when you can. Those are some lessons that I learned from Lou, really by, like I said, not from things that he said, but it was just by example. So I feel forever indebted to him for not just our friendship, but for showing me how it should be done.
I think we can all appreciate when you take a class with Lou, just how captivating he was. I mean, he was telling stories about jumping on the backs of sea turtles, I believe in Indonesia. Of course, he would teach us a ton of biology. We didn't really know he was teaching us a ton of biology, but through these stories and everything that he had to offer us, it was a transformative experience to be one of his students. And thinking back on it, Lou didn't teach introductory biology every year. He taught it every other year. And if I had taken biology that first semester, who knows what would have happened. So that's kind of the first the first way that he kind of influenced me and basically set my life in a direction I hadn't thought of. I didn't realize research was a career. It was something in hindsight I should have. I was kind of one of those Jacques Cousteau type kids who watched all the nature programs and that kind of thing, but didn't realize you could actually have this as a job. And to hear Lou's stories about the work that he did in the places that he traveled and just the freedom to ask questions and figure out how to answer those questions just was incredibly inspiring. And I quickly decided that school wasn't for me. Not that I could have gotten in with my grades, because I still managed to climb quite a few C's through college. Just had a great experience working in his lab for a couple of years. You know, I summoned up the courage to ask Lou if I could be one of his graduate students, if he had space for me. To which he responded, no. He didn't have funding for another graduate student. He had already accepted one, and at that time the lab was on tougher financial times. And so he said, I can't take you. I wish I could, but let's find a spot for you to go. And you know, he asked me, I think probably one of the quintessential Lou questions is, what is your dream job? And so we talked a lot about that. And I told him I was interested in agriculture construction, and I was interested in fish, and he gave me some names of some folks to work with, and actually paid for me to go with him to the E-Hormone conference to meet Peter Thomas at the University of Texas, who was a professor who worked on fish and construction, and essentially took me out there for a meet and greet. And we went out there, and I met with Pete, and I ended up working with him. And it was a really cool experience in that it taught me a lot about how hormones and hormone receptors work.
At some point when I started to get towards the end of my undergraduate career, I started thinking about career paths, and I wanted to reach out to people and have discussions about what I could do. And I met Lou then. And I remember meeting Lou, and I was very intimidated. You read, he's a very big person in his field. He's got lots of papers, and he wrestles alligators, right? He's a very intense person, but when I met him, he was so gracious with his time. And we had great conversations about life and career goals. And I also remember at one point he took me up into the top of, I believe, Barsham Hall, and I got to see the alligators on the roof. And it was just a really cool thing. Hey, we can do research on stuff like this. This is a really exciting idea. So when I decided to do my PhD at UF in chemistry with Rick Yost, I made it a point that I wanted Lou as a co-mentor. I really wanted to do something where we could use innovative chemical techniques to apply to environmental and biological questions. And the first time I met with Lou and Rick, I just remember that it was just an amazing meeting, and I left with pages and pages of ideas and notes. And I feel like that's always what happened when I talked to Lou, is that there were just a ton of ideas. And that was really exciting. And Lou was always teaching me. He told me, I don't want you to be a chemist who just has samples show up at your desk, right? I want you to actually go in the field and actually see how hard it is to get one data point. And that's something that really rang true to me, that I now pass on to my students, and you know, that it's really difficult to do a lot of the work we do. And I also remember on all these trips, my favorite part was actually the ride to there, where I had maybe a couple hours with just me and Lou, where we could just talk about just life and philosophy and other things, and those are some really great memories. And I spent a lot of time preparing for this talk, going back to a lot of old emails, and one that I really just made me smile a lot when I looked at it was when I told Lou that I was coming, and he was excited that I was going to be there. He sent me this email that says, "We have enough to keep you busy 80 hours a week. No kidding, but I promise I won't kill you." And it was just that great attitude that he just had invested in all the people he was working with, that he just really was excited to work with us. And that was something for me that was it really meant a lot to me. Also, I have these two photos down here, and I like these photos because for some reason I'm very serious in this, and Lou is not. And we're in South Africa, we're in the bush, we're knee deep in fish carcasses. This is probably like third day of doing this from up and sundown. And here I am, I don't know, giving some kind of like stoic photo, and Lou is giving me bunny ears. And it was just, it's a great reminder of the levity and, you know, just his atmosphere around you, that it kept things really fun. And I also really appreciated that Lou let us be creative and think outside the box. One, I just had a crazy idea. I said, hey Lou, what happens if we take these point-of-care analyzers that do blood chemistry measurements? What if we take them in the field, and what if we can take a drop of blood and assess whether or not an animal has the disease or not without actually having to kill it? And he was like, it's great, let's do it. And he supported it and ended up working, and we published it. And it was just a great example for somebody early in their career that it's okay to think outside the box, and having somebody supporting that was just a great influence on my development. So one of the things that, looking back, and I think a lot about Lou, in my mind, the way I think about Lou is he was this train that was going 100 miles an hour, and I was just trying to hang on. I was just trying to be part of the whole process. And when that train stopped, I actually found myself in a place where I didn't know what I wanted to do. I didn't really know what kind of researcher I was going to be. I didn't know what I wanted to, I was just lost. And it wasn't until we had the memorial services for Lou that I saw how much impact he had on so many people, and the types of things he did for people to help them grow as scientists, and just the overall help that he gave everybody, and how much they appreciated everything they did for him. And it was at that moment that I realized that's what I wanted for myself. That's what I wanted for my career. I wanted to have a legacy like Lou, where I had people that I leave behind that really appreciated everything I did for them. And so when the opportunity came up, and there was a position here back at University of Florida, so I'm back here again, I took it. And I wanted to start my own research group where I could have the same impact on students and people that Lou had on me. And kind of like a parent who, a new parent who now realizes the things that their parents did for them. I look at a lot of things that Lou did for me, and I use a lot of that to drive how I interact with my students. And he continually teaches me as I think about things that he did, and I'm trying to be a better mentor. Some of the things that I really take to heart about Lou is, and you're going to hear a lot of these things today, just surrounding yourself with great people. And that's obviously, the students are the lifeblood of the lab, and if you really put a lot of time and attention to them, you can really do some cool research. I also try to inspire people like Lou does, and educate, always educating. And probably the word I like the most is investing, because I feel like investing is giving a piece of you to your students, right? They see something that you're giving into them, that they can see that you're bought into them as a person. And so Lou did that to me. I was a chemist. He could have just flicked me away and said, I don't need to deal with this little chemistry guy, right? But he said, hey, I see potential. I see a way that we could use his enthusiasm, and we could do some really cool research. And I want to do that with my students as well. And also, credit is infinitely divisible, so we keep that tradition carrying on, that we always give everybody credit. Another thing that I feel like stems from Lou is that, again, he gave me a chance to work with him, and he saw potential in somebody who was outside of his realm of expertise. And so I try to do the same thing in my lab. So I try to make my lab available to everybody. So whether or not, whatever your major, your background is, whatever your knowledge level is, if you're on campus or off campus, we make our mass spec, our workflows available to everybody. And
through the years, the influence he had on me was I wanted to be involved with anything that he was working on, but it became clear that I wasn't going to be the best scientist in the world. I could do the field work, and it was fun. I could coordinate big efforts collecting the samples, but when it came down to crunching the numbers and publishing my work, that's not what I was good at. And so he would have conversations with me, and one of them was you can still be really successful, but you don't have to be the best scientist. And he said, one of your skill sets is you're a good communicator. You're really good working with people. But if you judge yourself based off how many publications you get out, you're probably going to struggle. And I remember I've read a variety of leadership books, and one of them, there's a quote, I think it's by Einstein. I found it on the internet, so that's what it said. But it said, if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its whole life believing it's stupid. And so what was interesting is I remember when I was working for the state, there's times where I just couldn't get a publication out. I couldn't get my work finished, and I just was trying as hard as I could. But then if you took me outside of that setting and said, hey, will you describe what you're working on? I could just talk to a whole crowd for a long time and be very passionate about it and describe it. And I just remember that was something that was a shift. And there's a few people that helped with that, but Lou was very influential. And so that was something that kind of made me do the shift. And so the job that I have now, I mean, most people don't even think I'm a biologist anymore. Most people think I'm like an attorney or somebody that deals with contracts and human dimensions, but that's my core, and I think, and that's worked out really well for me where I'm at now. But he was a world-class scientist, but it was the way that he communicated that really set him apart. I've seen multiple presentations that he gave in front of the heads of NASA. I've seen him give presentations to a variety of different things, and it really, he could take the most complex topics and make them understandable to the general public or to decision makers. And I thought that was such a skill set that you didn't see very often, and it really set him apart. But then it was also the energy that he had, and it was it was just a big magnet. And so working in a big ranch setting now, I was thinking about topics for what this would be, and I heard the term hitching your wagon to a star. And so that's where I came up with the idea for the topic for this, but it really was. And I know a lot of people in this room hitched their wagon to Lou, is because he had such an energy about him, and then you just felt so good being in his presence that you knew if you were in his presence, you could do more. And he was a magnet for really talented people, but it was also, he was an amplifier, where he seemed like you could just get more done being in his presence. And it could have been because you wanted to make him proud, but it could have also been that he could just hone your skill set in such a way where you could do more because of just being in his presence, and he'd try to clear out some hurdles so you could be more productive. And that was just something that I noticed with that, and that was just, I know it's a good book if you haven't read it, but literally Lou could have been one of the case studies in that book.
Lou came to all the departmental OBGYNs, or almost every one when he was around. And my thought was, there is nothing here that would be a remote interest to Lou. And that was because I failed to appreciate that Lou found everything interesting. So we were there one day when one of our Rico Suave infertility specialists was giving a talk. And as soon as the talk was over, Lou went up and talked to him and said, "When you aspirate those follicles, what do you do with the follicular fluid?" And the answer was, "Well, we throw it away." Well, by that afternoon, Jessica was already over at Coastal Fertility Center scoping out the laboratory and what's going on, and began a project where, as they were harvesting eggs for women getting ready to undergo in vitro fertilization, Jessica and the PhD lab person there in the, Coastal Fertility were collecting the follicular fluid, which resulted in the study, one of the studies that was referenced yesterday, about the presence of various EDC compounds in ovarian follicular fluid.
Okay, and so we've heard this expression from Lou that the signs do the talking, and I think that is true and safe when you're with a bunch of scientists, but if you're trying to talk about the science to other people, like, you have to also be good at talking about the science. Like, the science won't just do it for itself. You can put a graph up there and people won't know what it means unless you actually talk to them about it. And Lou could do this, excuse me, Lou could obviously do this for really any audience. So, Lou could talk to kids, and I didn't even know about this, but I was digging through some of just news articles and things like that of Lou, and evidently, Alligator Man was talking to 500 elementary school students, 500 elementary school students, which honestly sounds terrifying. Like, it's really impressive who he could talk to. And then he also talked to the public. So, there's numerous articles of Lou, but to be in a documentary that's reaching people's homes while they're sitting on their couches, watching TV and getting people excited and understanding about endocrine disrupting chemicals was pretty amazing. And then he could also talk to lawmakers, and I've been thinking about his congressional testimony that he gave, because this is just news coverage of it, where really the foundational researchers in EDC science got up in front of Congress and were like, we have to do something about this. And it actually ended up, I think, working towards passing some of the legislation around how pesticides are regulated in this country, and it's work that, I spend most of my days looking at pesticide risk assessment documents from the EPA. And all of this work is so foundational into how those assessments happen. And again, I kind of didn't know and wish I had more opportunities to actually talk to him about it. And then if we talk about science communication, this is his iconic quote, which at our staff meeting this week at EWG, I was mentioning I was giving this talk, and people in the room were like, I know that quote. I remember that, testimony. And so it speaks to his legacy there as well. And I just put on the left, this was, the wording that was used in the abstract of the 1994 EHP paper. And so to go from the wording on the left, which to be honest is already very well written and well summarized, I think people could understand that. And his scientific writing was already really accessible, but then you translate it into something that is gonna have really lasting impact in a way that people understand. This email was from Lou after Teresa and I think 7 other graduate students, many of the ones that Roger mentioned in his previous talk, took our journal club, and we decided we didn't want to just discuss papers every week and how they impacted our work. We wanted to actually set up this journal club so that we were doing a review of the literature on phthalates and their impacts on human health, and then also review the literature on intervention studies and think about how we could give some advice to, I think, probably Roger, I can't remember who the audience was, but I think it was probably a group of healthcare providers or some people in the OBGYN department. The presentation was also attached to this email, which was awesome, so I got to go back and look at it. But these words from Lou were just so amazing, and I think it, solidifies how he was saying, I know you each work harder doing the science, right? He trained people that were really good in science. But it was amazing to see the passion you bring to making a difference. The world, my world, is better because you guys are in it and I share it with you. So there were so many things, I think that, like I said, Lou embodied all of those lessons. He didn't necessarily just teach them to you, he led by example. And then of course at the end, he mentioned, let me know what I can do to help you move this forward, including turning this into a review paper. So.
Having been around Lou a lot, you can't help but to watch the way he and Matt interact, and I just thought he was an incredible father, and meant a lot to me to be able to see that. So I thought, there are some things about Lou I wanted to emulate as a dad. Unconditional love, support, all those things, and another important thing is, early exposure to the family business. Somewhere here, there it is. So I tried hard to do the same thing. But anyway, it meant a lot to me. It still means a lot to me that my son, even though he was little, got to meet Lou, and he knows all about Lou and Buzzy to this day. So that was another influence he had on me. And then in 2015, I finally got a different job. I work for Clemson now. I work for South Carolina DNR. It's a kind of a hybrid job of doing wildlife research in the coastal plain of South Carolina. So I'm back into research again. The Fish and Wildlife Service job was mostly regulatory. It was a good job to have, but it was not, really in my wheelhouse. I found it was just not as much fun to me as research was. So I'm doing this job now, and the best part of that job is being able to work with students. And again, we've heard a lot about Lou's mentoring prowess, and he's a legendary mentor, legendary teacher, legendary researcher, and I'm none of those things, but I try my best to give students the best. I can't have my own students because I'm a research scientist. I'm not faculty, but I can be on committees and I can actually, I can take them in the field and help them get their samples. And so the cool part of that is I get to collaborate, right? So I can collaborate with all my family members from Lou's lab and elsewhere. And so all these students, I'm not advising them, but I'm working with them in the field.
We all acted as a big team, and that's the thing that was most important with all of our research. It wasn't just one person doing one thing. It was hundreds of people accomplishing a goal to basically provide more information for science. And that was the goal for everybody. Whenever you were with Lou, you were a piece of the family. And that went through everything that he inspired. Whenever you joined his team, basically we were all safe because we all watched out for one another as a family. Here's more of the family members that we all, we actually had symposiums where people could actually come out. And the family would actually become one as a whole, and we got to go and have these symposiums to basically do information exchanges just like Thomas was talking about. So anyway, Lou was always an educator. He always came through with a very good message. It was always a take-home message. There was never just a message, it was a take-home message. That's how he gave it. My take-home message today is this. And he'd get right to the point. But he always learned from people and also taught people at the same time. It was a very instrumental language that Lou spoke, and he could teach anybody anything. I was the smartest man in the world for probably 5 minutes of my life every time I saw Lou, and then I was the dumbest guy 10 minutes later because I'd always forget it. But he'd always teach it in a way where you understood it, and you were like, God, I'm so smart. 10 minutes later, oh, it's done.
I have this little vignette that I think about all the time of what it was like to work with Lou towards the end, in the middle of his crazy, nonstop flurry of research activities, his international travel. I'm sure he was still testifying at the time, like everything, all of the stuff he was doing all the time. And how amongst all of this, he was still able to make us, his graduate students, feel really important and feel really connected to him personally, instead of just these little like caffeine and stipend fueled data generating machines that sometimes graduate school can make you feel like. So this was in 2014 in May, which was like, in the spring, the calm before the storm, because it's right before egg season and it's right before croc season, when they're going to South Africa. And I remember one day we got called into the old DNR lab that was at Fort Johnson, for anyone who is familiar with our campus in Charleston. And I remember we get called into the lab for something special, something like it had like a secret feeling to it because we were all hush hush about it. And I don't remember who was there, probably Ben and Satomi at least, because it felt like they slept at the lab at that time. Some of the other graduate students, Brenna, Thomas, Jackie was probably there, Teresa. And we all get ushered over to these, the big standing incubators that we used to use during egg incubations. Imagine 6 feet tall, huge swinging aluminum steel door. And I don't know who does this, but they pull the door open and somebody takes out very gingerly this tub, these big plastic bins that we used to use to transport hatchlings around. And they set it down on the bench top and they carefully open the lid and take it off. And inside is like the most perfect lily white hatchling alligator. Now, I assume most people in the room can probably imagine like a pixel perfect neonate alligator down to like the very last scute, exactly where everything goes. So most of us probably know that the stock color for alligator hatchlings is not white, but this thing was perfect white with like one little brown patch on the top of its head, almost like a little alligator mohawk, and eyes that were so blue they were almost black. So none of the typical cool gold and black irises. And I remember what's so crazy about these things is that they were thin. Like, I don't think anyone has any misgivings about how hard it is to be a hatchling alligator in the real world, but these little alligators were proof of it. And it turned out that this was all happening because Thomas Rainwater, probably sitting in the audience somewhere now, had somehow come across a number of these perfect leucistic hatchlings somewhere in South Carolina. And because leucistic gators are pretty hard to come by, I mean, like genetic lottery, this whole air of secrecy and mystery and trying to stay very quiet about this was because we were worried that if word got out about the location of where these alligators were or where they came from, folks, poachers would tear the place apart to try to find them and get as many as they could and sell them, because an animal like that is probably worth a lot of money. So Thomas, and I'm assuming his folks at I think, what were you at, U.S. Fish and Wildlife at the time, scooped all these hatchlings up and brought them back to us in Charleston to rehab them, and to do so very carefully because these things were really precious, with the hope that eventually we'd be able to turn them over to someone else. I think they ended up at a couple of aquariums. And, we, the grad students, got to spend at least a month, I can't remember, just like carefully watching, checking, feeding, like poring over every detail of these alligators, like how many crickets they ate per hour. Like, oh, the first one took 3 poops today and the other one hasn't pooped in 2 days. So, we're on poop watch. And it was all like under this guise of being sworn to secrecy, as if like the folks in the sea turtle lab next door, if they heard about it and they were going to break in and steal the hatchlings like they were in the Italian Job or something. But where Lou fits into all this story, other than the fact that Lou is the reason that this was all happening, is that I remember one day I got an email from Lou tipping me off that when I came into the lab the next day, I needed to bring all my camera gear. And this was relevant because in grad school and to this day, I got really big into wildlife photography because of Lou and because of Drew Crane. And because, Lou probably knew that I was chomping at the bit to photograph these animals. They're just so incredible. You don't see them in the wild. You barely see them if you're lucky enough to find one in an aquarium. And because he knew that I knew that he also wanted to have a full-on alligator photo shoot with these like perfect little hatchlings. And that's how we ended up the next day out in the dirt and the sand somewhere on Fort Johnson with Lou laying on his belly in his khaki shorts and polo taking pictures of this hatchling alligator. And in fact, let's see if I can get this to share. Like, this is just one of the photos that we were able to get that day. And I still think back to this photo. It's been 11 years now since I took this, and the photo itself is a really cool thing to have and think back on. But the point of the story isn't really the photo. It's that most of the memories that I have of Lou was just how, amidst the craziness that was his life, 2013 to 2015, he spent so much time and energy amidst all of that, making sure that we, his graduate students, always felt connected to him and important to him.
But the thing that I remember most about Lou is how he treated other people and how he made people feel. That is the number one thing that I've learned and that I do my best to try and do in my own lab and in my own interactions, because that is a thing I will never forget. And that was a gift. That was absolutely a gift.
So when I think about this lineage, I think about it from a transgenerational approach or impact, where Lou would be the F0, all of the people that have helped shape my career in the EDC world are F1, and then I am the F2 grandchild, who is now trying to also impart a lasting legacy in some ways to the students and stuff that I mentor today. And so really it's the love of science, the teaching people how to be a good scientist, pursuit of things that you're passionate about, importance of collaborations and mentoring, and then science communication that have really been drilled into me through my experiences and my mentors, many of which are in the room right now, that I know that we see a lot of Lou in, right? There's a lot of impact from what he's done and the priorities and ideals he's instilled in his F1 population that have now trickled down into my training and development as a scientist.
All right, so then I got to Lou's lab, and this is kind of how I was thinking about things at the time. The biology of the beast, that's the Louism I was thinking of. So that came from Lou, the biology of the beast. But this is really the general framework, I think, that I was thinking about things, where you've got biomedical science here, and then you've got kind of ecology and wildlife biology, two separate fields with this really big thick line that demarcates this, and you're either on one side or the other. And that's kind of how I was trained and was thinking about my science. But what became really clear early on, going back and forth to the medical school, the campus, the REACH talks, or I can't remember exactly what they were called at MUSC, or going to the field with Thomas and Phil at Yawkey, was in Lou's lab, this line really did not exist. They didn't acknowledge it, and this is a slide that Lou would show medical students, where he was kind of thinking about, like, where did that come from, right, this line? And he thought it was kind of rooted in royal bloodlines. So this, our kind of cultural fascination with genetics that was rooted, in early kings and queens, and then that kind of, this was a relic, this genetic determinism of how we were thinking about disease, how we were thinking about environmental health, and was really shaping that. I always thought that was really insightful. I think it probably still, we see relics of that in the way some of our politics are operating today. But one of Lou's superpowers, right, was not only to make those connections, but also to communicate these connections, right? He could see that and communicate those, and we've talked about that, or others have talked about that, and was really this pioneer of the sentinel species concept, right? And the idea here, this is the slide that others have shown that he would close out his seminars with, where he would say, if the environment is not healthy for her babies, it's probably not healthy for ours. And this idea was powerful, and it still is very powerful. It's incredibly powerful. And I feel like what we need to be doing as the F2s or the F3s is, how do we extend this? How do we strengthen this idea of the sentinel species concept? And how do we extend it? How do we push it further and do our parts? And so I think that's the big challenge for us now. And I think it's really key to how we engage or re-engage a weary and distracted public, right? It's like that was what was so key and powerful about Lou, is the sentinel species. It resonated with me and us as a scientist, but it also resonated with the public at the same time, and it didn't require a different set of language. It made sense. It's intuitive, and I think that's important.
When I got married, you all know that my kids were fairly small, and Lou was always Lou to them until we got married, and then he became Papa Lou. And in the lab, when they'd go up to see Lou, they would refer to him as Papa Lou, and soon the students were calling him Papa Lou. And this went on for years. And as I think about it, it's Papa Lou who left his family. His students were his family, and their students were his grandkids. And I see this now going on to great-grandkids, and I am very pleased that Papa Lou had such a great influence on everybody.